U.S. stocks rose to fresh records on Thursday, the last trading day before the long 4th of July holiday weekend. Investors applauded the passage of President Trump's domestic policy bill as well as the latest jobs report. The U.S. economy added 147,000 jobs in June, with the jobless rate easing to 4.1%. Healthcare, hospitality, and state and local government hiring helped fuel those job gains. 7,000 jobs lost in manufacturing. Also helping markets, word from Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent that the White House will wait until the fall before it begins looking for a new Fed chair. That could give the current chair, Jerome Powell, at least some breathing room until his term expires in May. Bessent said he expects what he called a flurry of trade deals by July 9th. That's the day President Trump's 90-day tariff pause runs out. We should note White House has promised lots of flurries of trade deals, which we have yet to see. Rana Foroohar joins me now. Lots of questions for you. First is the big, beautiful bill positive for U.S. economic growth in your view?
You know, I got to say no. The markets are always going to like tax cuts, but if you look at the debt and deficit implications, and really, midterm, I think that this could have a pretty bad impact on the economy. Investors from overseas are really worried about rising debt levels. I'm also concerned about the fact that a lot of these cuts that are going to the wealthiest are being taken at the expense of folks at the lowest rung of the socioeconomic ladder. You're seeing Medicaid cuts. This is at a time when, if we are going to go into a slowdown at some point, you're going to want that kind of safety net. You're going to want people to not fall into poverty, not have a healthcare emergency that then ends up costing a lot.
Republicans, as you know, claim that the CBO estimates about how much this adds to the deficit over 10 years, close to $3 trillion. They say that's not right, doesn't take into account economic growth, expected, etc. What are the facts from your point of view?
So, lies, and statistics. If you believe in trickle-down economic theory, if you think that tax cuts create stronger growth, you might think that this bill will exceed expectations, create the kind of growth that would offset debt and deficit levels. But if you look at history, the tax cuts have not created growth in the past. We had much higher taxes at periods in American history where there was higher growth. The tax and growth really for the last 20, 30, 40 years, I don't think that there's been much of a relationship. On the other hand, there's a lot in this bill that's actually going to put America behind in areas like clean energy, some of the high growth sectors of the future. So it's worrisome to me.
Yeah, I mean, it's the deliberate ceding of ground in renewables, electric vehicles, et cetera, to others, including China, is an effect of this. We had a big jobs report today, and a positive one. And as of yet, at least in the headline numbers, we have yet to see economic damage from the trade war. And do you think that's because perhaps there's less damage taking place than imagined, or still a lag effect?
So I think it's complicated. You've had a lot of threats of tariffs. You haven't had the full impact potentially of these deals coming to pass. I will also say that I think big companies in particular have done a better job than many people would have expected at mitigating those costs through productivity and tech-driven efficiency. I mean, I speak to a lot of big companies that have spent the years since COVID really getting their supply chains in order, really using cutting-edge technologies to create those efficiencies, and I think they're paying off now. Mid-size and smaller businesses, not so sure about. And one thing I am going to be watching into the fall is how many smaller businesses do you see going out of business because of any inflationary impact, and what would be the carry-on impact of that into local communities on job creation.
There's a story in the Washington Post today that notes there are growing concerns about the reliability of U.S. economic data, with some agencies relying more on estimates, in part because of budget restraints. You're an economist. You watch these numbers. You have to have good numbers to enter into your calculus. Do you trust them less than you used to?
I'm not going to come out and say before I see more evidence that the data are false or that they're different than what we've been getting in the past. But one thing I will say, economic data is always fuzzy. I mean, we think numbers are numbers, they're facts. Well, they're based on the models that you use, they're
Right.
based on the assumptions that you make. They are always based on that. And I will say, I've thought for a long time that a lot of the data we were getting about our economy needed to be updated because the nature of the economy has changed and we're still measuring
Yeah.
widgets coming off assembly lines. And, a lot of us are, our business is here on our phones and in our heads.
Yeah, good point. Rana Foroohar, always good to have you on. Thanks so much.
Gas prices in the U.S., we just heard some of this from Pete, they're at the lowest they've been since 2021. That's according to AAA. The nationwide average is down about 35 cents compared to a year ago. I want to go to a petroleum analyst, Matt McLean, from Gas Buddy to get your perspective. Matt, good to see you. Happy 4th. The average that I just mentioned from AAA, is that what you're seeing?
That is pretty much exactly what we are seeing. And as Pete brought up about the heavy travel period for this upcoming weekend, I've been all smiles all day in all the interviews that we've been doing because gas prices are definitely lower than they were a year ago for the 4th of July. In fact, we have to go all the way back to the year 2021 on the 4th of July to get a price point of about where we are or expected to be in the next 24 to 48 hours. So it's really good news for motorists all the way around if you really want to stop and think about it.
Where are they the highest? Actually, I can guess, but I'll let you say it and I'll tell you if that's what I was thinking. And the lowest this weekend?
California
ding,
probably
ding, ding.
Is probably something. Yeah, that is, and Hawaii obviously as well. Also some very high gas prices there, pretty much along the West Coast. That's where on our particular Gas Buddy heat map at prices.gasbuddy.com, anything in that orange to red category, that is the western part of the United States. The cheaper areas you're finding in basically the South, the Southeast, and portions of the Midwest at this point. And then off to the Northeast, the prices start to tick up just a little bit as you make your way toward New Jersey, New York, and the Pennsylvania area as well. But, we've got 20 states that are below $3 a gallon right now. And unless, fingers crossed, something happens in the Gulf of Mexico, something happens, or the Gulf of America, as well as the Atlantic, the hurricane season, basically what I'm talking about there, or any kind of an additional dust up that we may see out in the Middle East. If we don't have anything over the coming weeks out of in either area, we should see prices continuing to slowly decline over the next couple of weeks at the very least.
That was one of the questions I was going to ask you. I wasn't even yet thinking about hurricane season. I was more thinking about what we have been seeing in the Middle East. Travelers could expect price fluctuations given any disruption or disturbance or war, obviously, kicking up even more in the Middle East in particular.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And we have been monitoring that obviously very carefully. In fact, about 9 days ago, we here at Gas Buddy were talking about the fact that prices were going up. And quite honestly, in the middle of the day, as soon as the ceasefire was announced, even though it was shaky for a few days, prices on the crude oil market and wholesale gasoline prices began to plummet. And they did so for several days. We had to pivot ourselves. Yeah, prices we thought were going to go up. Ceasefire started bringing prices down. You're exactly right. Any additional dust up in the Middle East where they're producing oil, yeah, you could create a little bit of a tension there in the price of crude oil and gasoline prices. And so, yeah, we do monitor that very, very carefully.
Take me into your crystal ball. What do you see in the near future, barring what we just talked about in the Middle East and, of course, Mother Nature, about where prices are going with regard to gas?
Yeah, absolutely. If we don't have a hurricane situation, if we don't have anything going off in a country that produces a lot of crude oil, we actually may continue to see prices into July continue to decrease. And like I said, I've been smiles all day about saying something like that because that means motorists are going to be saving some money. Now, keeping in mind, OPEC is also going to be meeting soon, and they too have been talking about increasing production, which would actually put some pressure on the price of oil and start bringing it down even further. So we'll have to wait and see what that particular meeting turns up when it comes to whether or not they increase oil production in the Middle East. But regardless, there seems to be some good pressure being placed on crude oil prices as well as wholesale gasoline prices that should, barring any kind of an unforeseen circumstance, continue to bring the price of gasoline down across this country in the next week or two, especially.
It is always good when the guy from Gas Buddy is smiling. It is good to give people good news on something that really affects their wallets every single day. Matt McLean, happy 4th. Thanks so much for being here.